Hello, everyone. I'm Arshiya Lokhandwala, and I welcome you to the panel with some really accomplished, art historians and artist curators. So I'm really thankful to be here. Thank you very much for your kind invitation to the Sharjah Biennale, including Hur Al-Kashmi, Salah Hassan, and the entire team. So today's panel, I have with me Yuko Hasegawa, Anita Dube, Reem Fadda, and Alia Swastika, all very accomplished, exhibition makers. And I'm really excited to kind of speak to them further and unpack some of their ideas. So by way of introduction, I'd like to actually begin as a tribute to Opie and Vizor. It would only be seem appropriate to revisit Walter Benjamin's thesis of history, the angel novice that appeared ever so often in Opie's exhibition, which while looking at the past got ushered into the future, unstoppable by a storm called progress. This makes us actually examine how one can think about history and about the relationship between contemporary events and history, especially the history of progress, which is also accompanied by destruction. I actually cite this given this unprecedented moment where the entire world, for the first time, is experiencing the loss of lives simultaneously and the impact of the deadly COVID-19 virus. The center and the periphery, the West and the rest, both, and sometimes more in the center than in the periphery, have been equally devastated by the pandemic. Looking at the Western world, political systems as well as the art institutions seem to be crumbling, with allegations, particularly within the US, given the recent murder of George Floyd or the Republican insurgency of January 6, 2021. The West no longer is secured in its hegemony. What are the changes that will happen, or what is the new normal is to be seen. But one thing is for sure, the power structures in play economically, socially, politically have shifted. And this moment gives us time to rethink art institutions, art practices in imaginative ways, and also new ways to engage the public, both offline and online. In contemplating thinking historically in the present as a way to examine the legacy of Opie and Vizor, I contend that much of the shift and the changes in the art world, particularly in relation to the inclusion of the non-Western artists within the larger sphere, have emerged as a result of Opie's Documenta 11. By way of influence, this magnum opus prompted and influenced several of the new biennales of the global South from the region. But before I actually speak about the Documenta, I would like to actually establish Opie's astute and obsession with history and his ambition that will take on the world, to take on the world and to push for a shift from the Eurocentric discourses to more inclusive ones. Within the 10-year span of having witnessed primitivism in 20th century art, affinities of tribal and the modern in 1984 at the Museum of Modern Art, we could see that, for example, so here what I'm trying to do is, Opie was so ahead of his time. And so he witnessed primitivism and of course, this very highly problematic exhibition of 150 works with modern artists like Pablo Picasso, Paul Gauguin, Brancusi, along with other 200 objects from indigenous cultures such as Africa, Oceania, and North America. And as a historian, Thomas Machiavelli has, called out the omission of the dates of the indigenous people of the works and the absolute repression of the primitive context, meaning, content, and intention was what actually made primitivism one of the most critiqued exhibitions in the world. So essentially, having seen this and witnessed this, Opie, almost 10 years later, curated the short century, so 1994, to subvert the gaze of the continent of Africa and embark to embody the primitive, altering the image of Africa as a dark continent that was barbaric and backward, highlighting the history of the continent since decolonization, including the struggle of freedom and democracy. So although the exhibition traveled throughout several venues in the US, and I think even in Europe, in Germany as well, it never was exhibited in Africa because of lack of funding. And I think this was something that really got to Okwi, and he felt that if an exhibition speaks about a nation, continent of Africa, and it's not seen by the people, it's highly problematic. So within 13 years, furthermore, Okwi responded much to the critiqued Magician de la Terre of 1989, curated by John Herbert Martin. Magician was conceived as the first global exhibition that included the work of 100 artists from different parts of the world, which were critiqued for the totalizing worldview that lacked critical distinction between art, craft, primitive, modern, and traditional contemporary arts. So in a way, the documentary 11 of 2002 is a way, or it can be seen as an antidote by Okwi and Visa to actually correct everything that was so highly problematic. And I'm sure all of you remember the Magician de la Terre and the outrage that it created. And Okwi, of course, 13 years later, in a way sums up the courage to actually do this large exhibition, which in a way is what I would like to contend, the first global exhibition of contemporary art. So the documentary 11 emphasized the absence of the non-Western canon from the Eurocentric setting within the mainstream discourse of the arts through its unique curation of the post-colonial constellation that comprised of 4 education platforms, which I'll discuss later. Held in Kassel, the post-colonial constellation, as Okwi explains, is an understanding of a particular historical order that configures a relationship between the political, social, and cultural realities, artistic spaces, and epistemological histories, not in context, but always in continuous redefinitions. So toppling the Eurocentric exhibitions in addressing the documentary 11, one of the largest questions undertaken was to challenge the greatest epistemological critiques of the West's greatest myth, which is history. History has always been seen as a Western construct, with very little acknowledgement of the non-Western world, pretty much till the 1980s. The West has always written non-Western history from their perspective, much as the rules of the colonial interaction. The voice of the post-colonial, non-Western other has been suppressed for centuries and never heard. This lack of visibility of the post-colonial discourse is especially significant when the outcomes of memory, history, and ethics get intrinsically linked. Hence, Envisa's single-minded objective in Documenta 11 was to make the historical voice of the post-colonial heard in a larger global context of art. So here it is my suggestion that the third wave of biennales that we're seeing pretty much from 2010 have really benefited by Okwi's Documenta, particularly the 4 platforms, which also contributed a lot to kind of rethinking history and knowledge production. So putting this into perspective, the Documenta 11 platforms began by bringing the local context of the region into sharp focus. And then extending them into the larger universe of the world. So the first platform, Vienna, Democracy Unrealized, questioned the theories of institutional policies that define democracy in the new world order of globalization. By inversion of the title, Unrealized, Envisa questioned a paradigm of democracy as a way to interpret the varied modifications that the ethics of democracy and its institutional forms have undergone. The second platform experiments with truth, transnational justice, and the processes of truth and reconciliation, which took place in Delhi in India, titled after Experiments of Truth, an autobiography of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi in the 1920s, dealt with questions of ethical slant and judicial justice for the conflicts against genocide and human right violation through the Truth Commission. For example, it engaged how are human rights fashioned in the wake of unaccountable power, and thereby concerned itself with the reinterpreting justice and historical work that emerged from those commissions. In doing so, it also investigated the concept of the universal jurisdiction and the memorialization of these traumas within museums and memorials alike. The third platform, Creolite and Creolization, which took place on the island of St. Lucia, expanded the discourse from the Caribbean to the world so as to restore the historical links with the other continents of Africa, Europe, and America. In the founding text of the critical theory published in 1989 by the three Martinique intellectuals, they viewed the polycentrism of the Caribbean or the Creoleness as the interaction or the transnational aggregate of the Caribbean, European, African, Asian, and various other cultures. So the final platform, Under Siege, took place in Freetown, Joburg, Kinshasa, and Laos, examined the 4 cities in Africa, especially focusing on the process of urbanization in relation to globalization's effects within third world cities by undertaking the study of the urban system and accounting for ecologies of sustainability and platforms investigated via various effects and imperatives of modernization and development. So here I just want to stop and talk about how, for example, the biennales have been influenced by considering, these particular platforms and what OCWI did, and the fact that these different platforms became centers where there was an investigation which was not really tied to the main exhibition itself, gave, I think, a lot of impetus to local histories, and I think to a lot of biennales, which we will look at later, to kind of look at themselves within their own space. Here I'd like to actually start by inviting my panel. First is Yuko Hasegawa, and the title of her talk is The Biennale Curator as a Facilitator, Engendering Social Common Capital. And in this talk, Yuko is going to who was also the curator of the 7th Sharjah Biennale, is going to speak about her experience and give us insight about her exhibition, and then also talk about a very exciting upcoming project, which is the Biennale of Thailand, or the 2nd Korat Nakhon Tachima Biennale, which is the largest province of Thailand. So this Biennale is upcoming, and I think she has planned something very special, and I think we're very privileged to actually have a preview of that. Second, we will be speaking to Anita Dube. Where are we? Whom are we speaking to is the title of a talk. And for those who don't know, the Kochi Biennale it's actually considered the Venice of the East. It's a very interesting biennale which set up in Kochi, which has, looking at the history of trade routes and geography from like as early as 14th century, has had, relations with the rest of the world. So this is the biennale that was started by 2 Kerala artists who live in Bombay, but Krishnamachari Bose and Riaz Komu. And so this biennale, interestingly, took a long time to kind of come about for various reasons. One of the things is as early as 1968, India already had a Trinale, which Mulkraj Anand and other intellectuals had started. And this biennale actually looked at the Venice Biennale format, where they invited different nation states and they invited different artists to participate. But it was a government venture, and for whatever reason, maybe in some form it still exists, but it's not critical, and it didn't do very much outside of the 60s and the 70s. Also, there was an effort by Geeta Kapoor and Vivaan Sundaram in 2005 to set up a Delhi Biennale, but for whatever reason, that really didn't happen. And we're very happy that in 2012, the Kochi Biennale has kind of come to be, and it has, shaped up. And so Anita Dube, who is going to be with us, is going to speak about her edition, which is the 4th edition of 2018. Then we have Reem Fadda, who's going to speak about her current work and practice, and also kind of introduce the idea of the Marrakesh Biennale, which is a a really interesting biennale. It's a non-profit association which was set up yeah, for contemporary art in Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean region. And I think there were 4 editions of which took place. And 2016, the edition that she curated was, as of now, the last one. And we hope to see some more. And we look forward to insights from Reem about the Biennale and the success and possibly the failures as well. And finally, and not the least, is Alia Swastika. And I think this is such an interesting idea of having the Biennale Yogya Foundation of the Yogyakarta in Indonesia has now, it's a equatorial, an equatorial Biennale, I beg your pardon. And so for the next 10 years, pretty much till 2022, the Biennale sets out equatorial locations as its main premise and working areas. So they range from the latitude of 23.27 north and south. And so the first collaboration was with India in 2011, and Alia was part of it, and would love to hear about that. And followed by the Arab countries, that is Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Emirates. And it's continued till today. And we'd love to hear about more on this from Alia. She's also going to talk about something really interesting, which is a connection with Sharjah and Indonesia, and the fact that both of them are countries that with a very large Muslim population. So what is the kind of collaboration and the different links that can be set outside of it, and some of the works and practices of the same. So I'm not going to take much time, but just very quickly, I just want to sum up some of the things. What I do believe that the centers such as China, the Middle East, India, and Latin America, to a larger extent, have been able to develop their own regional market and audiences through their own economies. They're no longer dependent on routed via the West, as they service their own domestic burgeoning art market, have their own local museums, and serve to showcase their artists outside the Western gaze. The biennales of the Global South from the region I feel, are more experimental and very fresh platforms. And I can just say, for example, Kochi, I had met several people who are more excited to come to Kochi because, of course, they've been to Venice many times, but also the approach and the location being very, very new. But I'd like to actually look at this also in terms of propose the biennales of the Global South have been reworlded or have come into their own. In doing this, I'm borrowing from Gayatri Spivak's concept of worlding, originally, as you know, a concept of philosopher Martin Heidegger, which Spivak revisits as the process of violence that emerges during imperialism, in which the colonized territories get deemed as worlded once colonized. By extending Spivak's provocation, I suggest that the global biennales of the South have deworlded themselves, in which they have liberated themselves from their earlier colonial positions, colonial legacy, and instead chosen to reworld within the post-colonial context with their own sense of agency and renewed connection with the world as large. So thank you. So with that, I'd like to introduce Yuko. So Yuko Hasegawa is the artistic director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Tokyo, from 2016 to present, and the professor in curatorial studies at the Graduate School of Global Art, Tokyo University of the Arts, ongoing, 2016 is ongoing. So she's actually so accomplished and has a very huge CV, but I'm just going to read a bit of some of her accomplishments. She has curated numerous exhibitions, including the Inter-Resonance, Inter-Organics, the Japanese Performance and Sound Art, Sharjah Art Biennial Foundation, 2019 to 2020, Dumb Types, Action, Reflections, Museum of Contemporary Art, Tokyo, Desire, a revision from the 20th century to the digital age, Irish Museum of Modern Art, Dublin. That's 2019 to 2020. Shar Japan, The Poetics of Space, the Sharjah Art Foundation, 2019. Intimate Distance, Masterpieces of the Ishikawa Collection, Montpellier, France. And Fukami, A Plunge into the Japanese Aesthetic, Hotel Samon de Rothschild, Paris. And the 7th International Moscow Biennale of Contemporary Art, 2017, and the Sharjah Biennale 11 of 2013. So I invite you all to read her CV, which is available on the website. But Yuko, if I may invite you to come on board and make your presentation, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Arisha, and such a wonderful introduction. Also, and very kind of strong statement, also involving an introduction ideas and OP embezzle, which my dearest friend was. So, and today's just talking about my thought, because you know, I'm not kind of elaborate in a certain kind of theories and oriented and kind of expression languages, because I always very simplified what I'm thinking about. Because upon the kind of today's topic about Biennale in a regional context, I'm talking about my own experience. So, and each region has their own political, social situation and cultural context. The role played by Biennales as exhibition differs accordingly. The form of the Biennales can't be simply classified as a Western or non-Western, or Middle East or Southeast Asian, so on. I have been working in several Biennales in various countries since the beginning of 2000. In many places where art institutions are not well developed, Biennale functioned as an alternative to them. Also, they have contributed to education, tourism, and the economy of the art market by introducing a global cultural diversity and creating a platform for the people to meet and discuss about a contemporary issue, either socio-political or cultural. Zoom back to my experience to previous biennial, which I was in charge, Shanghai, Beijing, and Seoul. They aim to educate the people and to introduce the diversity of the international art expression. They want to be participate in those kind of global art scenery on the map. In Sao Paulo, they aim to educate the people to grow a discourse about the formation of Latin American cultural identity, politics and art, as well as facilitated as an educational system for lower class people. In Istanbul, they are examining the mixed cultural identity of East and West and encouraging the critical awareness of current socio-political issues. In Sharjah, the aim was a reposition of the site geopolitically and culturally to involve the people of different classes, immigrant background, and to create an interaction. So this is my kind of the overview and from my experience, which I in charge by the last 20 years. After the year 2000, when the political and social crisis and global capitalism came into the fore, the focus shifted in the survival of the mind and the body in the face of the major conflict and ruptures, and to search for sustainability for a whole planet, including our species. So instead of the adjustment of all the kind of differentiation, also discrimination between the people, there was a need and a reset or alternative narratives. Translation of this unusual situation, like an anomaly situation. That's a big shift, particularly that happened in 2010 to 2020 in between. Artists had reacted to the changes, renewing their language to expression, media, and devices, inventing means of the deep commitment translating them into other languages, creating narratives that suggest an alternative withdrawal worldview. All of us, including artists, are more or less staying with trouble and have a responsibility to be a part of it. What is important for artistic activity is not to argue about a big unmanageable topic, but to intervene in a sensible medium, an object, to modify and shape it with the power of the imagination in shareable size, and share it with someone. Curatorial practice is a kind of the facilitation through multiple perceptual experiences, on-site, empathic experience and discourses, and their exchange. They seem to be one of the most effective ways perceiving the world in times of the VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. When existing and theories and common sense are not efficient as before anymore, the Biennale can have a greater effect in terms of its institutional borderless and alternative space-time and event-food characteristics. In this age of the confusion and trouble, what the curators can do? I think that is one of the most important things is just to listen to the ambient, the environment around you and us, and to think about how we can share it with others and to be part of the ecology is interdependence, symbiosis. Artworks and discussion of the high context concept are very important. However, sometimes it is more important to be able to share what is being said, not only through word and concept, but also through feeling, sight, sound, and touch, and other physical sensations. I was interested in creating an environment of the architecture and space. In Japan, there is a word called body knowledge. A philosophy that believes that it is good to feel with the whole body before thinking. My curatorial works will focus more on sensory learning. In this sense, the spatial design, the choice of the venue, and its constellation was very important. For the 11th Sharjah Biennial, I focused on the creation of public space that would emerge in the evening after sunset and public spaces sheltered from the heat of the daytime outdoors. And that would create an opportunity for interaction, discussion between people and art in the city. I observed and was convinced that our world has a great culture of the architecture and sound at the audible sense. That also including Asian people can share those kind of intellectual artistic sensibility to space and its ambient. I proposed to create a new kind of the composite space that was both public and private, inspired by Arabic courtyard, where the migrants and local residents could encounter each other. In order to rethink the meaning of the public space and present new models, I conducted the barrier space making project. I just shared the slide. Oh, sorry. I just go back. So this is the Sharjah Biennial 11. The title is Reverge toward the new cultural cartography. I just shifted the center of the, cultural, activity into the Sharjah. It's there are many kind of center because no central centers anymore. and any places can be central position, the multi-center, because when I just make analysis of statistics and nationality in Sharjah, because the local Emiratis and less 25%. The rest of the things and the people is migration. And what is most important things that when you look at the structures, because I'm sensing what the city has. So I just make some outside project connected to several points, because when you look at the green one, that is a public project Oasis. Sorry, that yellow one, it's a big park. But other I just try to create several connected several courtyards. That is black. So this Ottobo Nikanga, and I just many kind of artists create their own kind of installation and also their performative action engagement in the courtyard. And also there is some participatory work, SRI Carlos Amores, and the people can participate. So this is the largest project is Superflex, the Bank Street, because temporarily the Bank Street is blocked by excavation research. So I just use these spaces because to just artists change this place and make a little kind of landscape to make a park, because they make an ankette with the people to what is the most memorable and public furniture in your country, because each one has kind of some items and this what I like, what I remember, because those kind of artists put together all the different kind of public furniture in that region. So that's a mixed, make a park, because the most important things, because people can talk about what they which one they come from, and which kind of public furniture, what the story they have, because they have topic, also they have their own story to exchange, because this place is super popular. Because also after the end of the biennial, because this project stay and more 6 months. Also, they just want to relocate it and new kind of this park project by same artist and at the near future. That was very wonderful kind of experience for me. Also, we just make a cinema and the collaboration with Joe Apchow from Winston and filmmaker Thai, and also Reem. It's kind of he's an active to Germany to make a film. This kind of theaters still remain in the Sharjah art space. Also Oasis, because the KGDBS at the Belgium and two architects and a young architect make an Oasis, because this make an shadows and for the peoples between venues to venues. So that is the project is which are done in Sharjah, because most important things I just want to invite the people who never ever been to being a museum attendance. That is one thing. Also, even if any kind of topic and people just start to talk about that, because also it's very important to just motivate the people to be part of the city. Also, they are, potential, the possibility to participate in those kind of cultural events. So what is significant and making Biennale in these days under the time of Anthropocene and Capitalocene, particularly after 2020, after COVID time. So it is not matter it's a planning art project and then implemented it. Rather, it consists of the waiting for something to be generated by unearthing the possibility of potential site and resources, and setting up the facilitating the overall configuration. Instead of the project, I just want to use the terms engendering. So, something, it's very important, we have to shift our attitude, also our mindset. In a second Thailand Biennale, which I'm currently working, the Biennale teams become a facilitator. It will work together with local, its people, and visitors, waiting to encounter something that will enjoy the sensible capital. Post-COVID time, the system of the Biennale should be changed. Biennale organization, curators, and artists will be agents, and the local staff and collaborator become actor. Agent and actor, what Bruno Latour calls in his actor network theory. Curators and artists are sharing their concept and method to be cooperated by local people for co-producing Biennale as a social common capital. Under the butterflies and flocking on the mad, engendering and sensible capitals. The name is like that. This Biennale is a proposal in practice, primarily focusing on the ecologies specific to this region. In an attempt to create an autonomous microecologies and a new form of the sensible capital, focusing on system engendering by leveraging its open transversal culture, nature. The idea of the sensible capital is inspired by theory as a social common capital by Hirofumi Uzawa, who is a Japanese mathematical economist. In order to maintain social stability, Uzawa stated, it has recourse of the three forms of the capital. One is national environment, second is social infrastructure, third one, institutional capital. It's like a hospital, school, and so on. These types of capital must be regulated and facilitated by professional experts, and there need to be a sense of the fidelity, responsibility, that respect of the interests of the trustees. So Thailand Biennale seeks to discover the latent potential and the value of the various sites, including a university, temples, museums, zoos, parks, and the community of ceramic of the Silk Village. In line with this idea of the single and fiduciary trust, thanks to collaboration with the local experts and artisan for the students. So I just showing them slide. This is Thailand Biennale. I'm working with the three guys, the two Thai curators, one Japanese young curators. This is a concept which I already stated. And this, Arshiya says, this is the second largest province. Also, Korat is the center of the Nakhon Ratchasima province. So because touristically and completely unknown. But for me, it's very interesting, make a challenge. This is very kind of the ordinary people, and ordinary people just live to do an everyday life. But also has a lot of potential resources. So one is example is the Commission Harun Mirza. And there is one of the very important reservoirs. It's like also the ancient hospital, like a healing places. But there is a reservoir, water places, and he just make a sound installation. But it's very interesting. Those kind of signals are based on the frequency that's being studied and kind of the therapeutic and properties against Alzheimer's. This is because Aloha Saya, it's an old name of the hospital. This is the places. Because this is ideas of new kinds of findings and the potential resources, the meanings and the places. Aloha Saya is 11th centuries and the king made 100 hospital, those kind of healing places, and between Pimai and Angkor Wat. So also Yoshitane, architect, and he make a very interesting light setting because this is very rough and kind of like a storage of the, it's almost outside the storage. And many kinds of important reliefs and, installed there. It's almost a storage. But he just make a very nice kind of light installation and slowly and up and down. So just give an completely new kind of faces and also new value to the appearance, all those kind of and all the things. Also, Sandra Chintos working with many kind of many child and make a painting is what is the future. So make an just a tile kind of floral paintings on the center of the city. Also, Eris Black and he just make an there are many skateboarder in the city and they make a lamp or the original ideas and to just reflecting the local patterns. Also, Shilpa Gupta, and she make a beautiful and kind of project is just digging research of the local writers, poets, to just make an installation in the local library. So all this and Ponsen and local Thai artist and the zoo, and he make an place and where the kind of people meet the animals, the birds. So this and Atacama lines, and also this Atacama project was presented at Sharjah Architecture Biennial, and there's a group of the people working together to and a researcher, also anthropologist, and so they make an nice presentation and in Sharjah Architecture Biennial, and showing lots of kind of new kind of research and resources into the amazing and presentation. So this is something like that. So this is the cave paintings and it's near Korat city, and but no one almost touristically and completely unknown. So almost no one knows about that because this kind of one individual kind of researcher of archaeological researcher, Miss Tip, and she just accompanied with one assistant made research. It's completely her own individual work. We just focus on, her research, and it's also inviting to an expertise and from the Bangkok University. So also inviting the Atacama's and group people to just help her research to make an kind of and a nice kind of presentation, visualization to present the people what is and what they have. So this university staff, and we just working with kind of university and peoples and also city peoples, because we are just facilitators, artists, and given some kind of ideas, also kind of the methodology to all of them, and a collaborator, co-producer of this biennial. This is my kind of new kind of form of the understanding what the Biennale is. The detoxification of the body and the spirit of this land that has been awakened by capitalism and the global economy will begin as its butterflies sought out and nutrition and refreshed themselves through mud budding. Because all the ideas and the butterfly, the mud, it come from this kind of detoxification process. That's the image of this biennial. Thank you very much. Arshiya, you should press the mute. You're mute. Open your mute. Arshiya, you're mute. Stop your mute. Arshiya-san, mute.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Okay. I do beg your pardon. No, I was asking you when it opens, and it looks amazing, and I have many questions, and also particularly the challenging moment that we have, COVID. I'm sure you have a plan as to how to kind of go about it, but we'll come back to that later. But first, let me begin with Anita Dube. We are kind of a little behind on time now, so let's move a little faster. So Anita Dube is an artist and an art historian, and her practice is primarily in sculpture, but also includes photography, video installation, and performance. She's trained as a critic and historian in the city of Baroda, now Baroda, whatever, in late 1970s. And so a lot of her work, addresses the idea of memory, history, mythology, and phenomenological, I beg your pardon, experience. Although always mercurial and self-critical, her practice has evolved with specific materials, velvet and other fabrics, such as skins, for found objects, and copper and enamel eyes used on temple sanctuaries. Uh, she repacks and recycles materials, and in the past decade, she has become increasingly involved with language and text as her subject, using both the metamorphical devices and abstract epistemologies. So Anita has shown widely in many biennales, galleries all over the world, and I don't want to take more time. So Anita Dube, can I hand it over to you?
Yeah. Okay, can everybody hear me? When I was invited to curate the 2018 Biennale, I had absolutely no experience and had never imagined that one would curate something like that on a scale which Biennales have a scale which is frightening. Actually, it is really frightening kind of scale. So what immediately when I was in the initial stage, when I was mulling about the whole thing, I had this thing that came into my brain which said that I need to explore the possibilities for a non-alienated life. And that title actually came very early in my thinking, and it actually never disappeared. It remained stuck in my brain, and I tried very hard to change it, but it didn't. The reason for that, it was quite simple, because over the last decade, as we are getting more and more hyper connected with each other, I realized that I was missing out on the certain connections that one had with friends and with colleagues and with fellow artists in let's say the 80s or the 90s, and in the last decade and a half, those connections have become watered down, and they're no longer as strong, and a strange kind of a creeping sense of alienation has cropped in among all of us. So one of the key things that I tried to explore was, how do we get past this deep sense of alienation that we have? Another reason for exploring this trajectory while curating was the feeling that it's actually on that ground that fascism is slowly expanding and growing. The more we get deeply alienated, the more we can connect through virtuality in a very one-dimensional way, through one-liners, through and which results in a connection which is a violent connection, which is not a connection of comradeship, which is not connection of, but it's a connection where mobs can appear like a flash mob. So these are the kind of very disturbing things that one has been seeing across. I think, I don't know about other, but very much in India in the last like 10 years, we have been seeing the growth of fascism slowly, and how our our spaces of dialogue, spaces of resistance, spaces of actually protest actually have been slowly shrinking to the point of people, and at this point when I'm talking about it, of course it's not 2018, but it has shrunk to the extent that any kind of protest is considered anti-national, and people are being thrown into jail at the moment. So this is something that is now, this is where we have reached, but the reason is that slowly we are unable to connect, and so one of the key things that can I have the first can I have my first image, please? Yes. So while I'm speaking, you can read the initial curatorial note. And yes, so as I said, that alienation was an important peg around which many things were constructed. Another thing was that I realized that it's okay. It's important to think about location as a location in Kochi and Kerala, not just the fact that it's a port, that it has all these wonderful go downs and wonderful warehouses where art can be housed, but the fact that it does not have any major museum, it does not have any major gallery, art gallery. As a result, the primary audience in Kerala um, is exposed to the art of the world in every 2 years when the biennial happens. And therefore, the biennial itself can be a kind of a very authoritative institution, So this was something that has been always troubling me, because I have seen as a visitor and as a participant in the earlier biennales, how very ordinary people, and one of the great achievements of the Kochi Biennale is that ordinary people come to see this. And every time the statistics are that in the last couple of biennales, about 6 lakh people, 6 lakh is 600,000 people have been visiting the Biennale in the last two things. Now, so this is the question, like, who are these 600,000 people? It's not us. It's not the people who go to Venice or who go to Sharjah or who go to it's not these people. It's 600,000 people are people coming from small cities in Kerala, in South India, students from all over India traveling to Kochi to see and to kind of expand their understanding. So that's an audience that cannot be taken lightly. And for me, it was a very, very important element in how the Biennale was constructed. So because as we know that the language in which a lot of contemporary artists speak, and that has been through the vast proliferation of biennales all over the world, it's a particular language that has evolved, and many contemporary artists speak in that language, which is very far away from ordinary people. They have no understanding of this kind of language that culture has employed. So it's not that one, because I'm think that one has to kind of tone down, but it is something that I had to be very sensitive about, that one could select artworks in such a way that the audience is not alienated, and that the audience has a sense of not only empathy, but a sense of participation and an engagement with what they're seeing. Because it is my belief that, that any sort of physical involvement, it takes you a long way in which breaking down not only alienation, but the fact that you are no longer, you don't feel, and that's a first step, that you do not feel that you are only a consumer of culture, but the fact that you can be a participant and maybe a producer. So just to take away these kind of the fact that we remain not consumers, but that we are invited into the Biennale through work and through setting up certain other spaces where people can feel warm, a certain sense of warmth, a certain sense of being welcome, and a certain sense of being drawn into engaging not only with the work that they've seen, but and I'll talk about what I tried to do, how I tried to construct the Biennale to make these things happen. That the people should be able to express themselves, to be able to not only particular work that they see in the Biennale should take them to something else, should take them to a piece of music, could take them to a piece of poetry, could take them to another trajectory entirely, and that could be shared. So then comes to the fact that it was not enough for me to just make an exhibition. I understood that that's an old model, that the model has to expand, and the model needs to have a kind of a counterpoint, another thing. And for me, that was a kind of a public space, an architectural space to create in through which ideas and people could just flow and could share whatever. And I was very open to the fact that people could share whatever they felt like. The any person coming from maybe in Tamil, or as I said, somebody sharing a piece of Bollywood music, and the next person saying that, you know, I want to share a Judith Butler lecture. So while the freedoms of the internet are still available to us, I thought we needed to use all these things and to create a space where people would be able to share whatever that was precious to them. And through that, build up another kind of a knowledge laboratory where we are not only talking of discourse, and we are not only talking of knowledge that is coming from top to down, but we are also listening to people and thinking of knowledge as a very broad-based thing, where a lot of affect is involved, where feeling is involved, where the fact that people, whatever is the most precious for them, they can share it with you, and they can share it with whoever's around. And that's a very liberating thing. And that's not only a liberating thing for anybody, to think that they also have contributed in their own way something to the Biennale. So the Biennale is not complete just by the exhibitions, but by whatever people can put in that little thing which I call the knowledge laboratory, anything. So it was a very open-ended. How successful it was is another matter, but the idea and the desire was very much there to create this community and to create this environment of sharing and exchanging all kind of knowledge and all kind of things that they loved. So as you know, that the Biennale, it was split into two parts. One was the exhibition model, which is an old model. We cannot avoid that, I guess. And the second was the pavilion, which was the sharing space. I will can we go to the next slide? A work that I want to show as a kind of a thing that encapsulates a lot of things that I wanted to do via the Biennale, to create this kind of a space, which is a space beyond belief. Because as you know, when we are talking about the rise of fascism, and we are talking about the rise of the right wing all over the world, faith and belief has become certain pegs on which all kind of violence is being hung. And to imagine that we can only through culture that we can create this strange space, which is, I don't know, which is part futuristic. There's a futurity involved in that space. There's a imaginative. It's an imaginary space. It's a beautiful space. It is a space which leaves religion behind, and it's a this is a work that actually in some ways describes what the Biennale tried to do. Can we go to the next one, please? Okay, so now I'm just going to talk about certain key words, and there are many that will come when we scroll down the images. We will come down to many, but fragility was a very important key word, because so many exhibitions are like, especially biennales, and in my experience as a person who's traveling to see biennales, and it's also the scale of work, the very large masculine kind of works that always have confronted me in the biennales, and I thought that I need to foreground fragility as one of the characteristics that we can think about artwork, not necessarily as a muscular thing, as a big thing, but as something very fragile and very tender. And of course, these would lead us to more keywords. And some of those keywords would be that what about values of empathy? What about compassion? What about intimacy? And many of these things which are connected to the practices of women artists, but not necessarily so. And you'll see that the artists that I invited would have some of these characteristics, but then you would have the Gorilla Girls who would be totally taking on institutions, taking on institutions in all their, various avatars of repression that they have. So, so as I said, so these are certain keywords that I wanted to foreground. Other keywords that I want to just speak while you're seeing this fragility is that there is throughout the Biennale there was a desire for liberation. That people coming together, talking, discussing, doing things together, cooking, making, and a desire for not only liberation but also comradeship as a duo, liberation and comradeship as a duo. And there were several other such duos inside the whole exhibition. Another duo was the duo of pleasure being combined with pedagogy. And it was my desire, like, how can I combine pedagogic kind of knowledge with pleasure? Because without pleasure, I think human beings refuse to kind of really ingest anything. And it's just the way I think about things. Sensuality, pleasure, a very, very important part of how we receive the world or how we receive culture as well. And therefore, it was a very important element to which I wanted to, as I said, to connect. So to connect, I thought that these things were very, very important too. And saying that the desire to make a Biennale which was very inclusive of all kind of margins, which is the queer community, which is the so-called Dalit community, the people who in India have been discriminated against because of the caste system for thousands of years. So practitioners from the queer community, practitioners from the Dalit community, practitioners who have been on the margins for various reasons. For example, I can give you an example of a photographer, Vicky Roy, who I had invited, who actually spent some years on the railway platform as a person who had run away from home and who was staying in the railway platform in Delhi before he joined an organization and slowly was given a camera and then became a photographer, a very well-known photographer today. So all the marginal figures actually were very, very importantly placed inside the Biennale and in a very warm embrace and in a very inclusive of all such things. I also want to, now that we are talking about various doors, and we will come to images later, I think we will run through images a little later. But I also want to say that another idea that was very important for my Biennale was a project that I did with Thomas Hirschhorn. And the project was Quality, No, Energy, Yes. It was a brief 1-month workshop that he did in Kochi, inviting a particular object that from their home and bring it within a group and to talk about its qualities, and then through a group interaction arrive at an understanding that how much quality does it have, how much energy does it have, and therefore taking a judgment by discussing qualities and energy. And so the project was called Energy Yes and Quality No. And I think this is also an important kind of, how do I say, a keyword running through the way the Biennale was constructed, where energy was an important concept and not necessarily quality. Can we move on to other slides, please?
Anita, we're running out of time, so if you can go a little faster,
okay.
please. Thank you.
No. I think I have to just quickly show you everything. I can't have less time than other people. Fragility. It's a work which has repair as an important element in it. It's through embroidery and rafugiri. Next, please. Uh, agriculture, agricultural implements, about the rural economy and agriculture as an important thing for us to think about while we're thinking about exhibition making, especially in contexts such as ours. Next, please. Next, please. Hello. An auto rickshaw driver who does embroidery, and it's nice that to have male artists who do things which are traditionally known to be occupations of women. So it's a male artist who, an auto rickshaw driver who did wonderful small works, embroidered works. Next, please. An interesting artist from South Africa, where it was found that that the slave trade happened from Kochi to South Africa, and certain, it's called 101 deeds of sale. The document was discovered by her, and who was the person who bought the person for how much money when they set sail from Kochi to Cape Town. Next, please. Another keyword, resistance. Next, please. Tanya Buruguera, who was invited at the moment, was not allowed to travel. She wrote us a letter, and we thought that we will use that letter, write that letter, or in the space that we thought that she would work in. And I want to just stress that, because the Biennale was very flexible. You know, there was no emphasis on a particular work. If she was not able to come and she wrote this letter became the work of art. And I'm happy to share that we enjoyed the fact that we had Tanya's presence as a letter to the Biennale. Next, please. Shilpa Gupta, talking about jailed poets. Was a wonderful installation with sound and text, and talking about poets and people who poets who have been jailed in all across the world. Next, please. Just an image. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but just one image. Next, please. Artists who are making large installations against the right-wing government in India. Very brave installation by one of our artists who's a professor in an art college about the presence of the right-wing group called the RSS. Next, please. As I was saying, an artist, Vivi Vinu, a Dalit boy who talks about the experience, the painful experience of marginal communities. Next, please. Next. Just again, the detail from Vivi Venu's. No, please go back. Zanel, in a very large photographs of Zanel Mukholi, and where people could, a busy street where people walk, and it was nice to have large, very, very sort of, you know, in your bikes, and also giving the women in Kerala, because it's a very repressed society, images of self-empowerment through these images. I was very interesting to do that. Next, please. Can we move next? Next. Yes, okay. So community, next, please. Next, please. A Songdong, a project where people are writing with water, and it's and people who know Songdong's work, text, people were writing text, people were drawing things with water on this glass, and it would disappear in a short while. Next, please. As you can see, you know, it's a smaller image, but you can see people really enjoy. Actually, as I said, pleasure was a very important element in drawing the people into the Biennale. I really wanted people to enjoy themselves while they were learning something. Next, please. Monica Meyer, a project about sexual harassment, where she invited people to, and it was, and next, please. In the thick of the Me Too movement, it was important to have an artist like Monica Meyer, a very fiery feminist from Mexico, to do something simple like that. And there was a huge response to this project. So many women penned down their experiences, and it was a large wall in which this was on display along with some other work of hers. Next, please. Next. Talking about a transgender activist in the last slide, a transgender activist who was killed, Sweet Maria, a young artist made a whole monument called the Sweet Maria Monument in the earlier slide, where a large red skirt was raised. Some food related projects, this is called the Edible Archives, where different varieties of rice were collected by Anumitra, and she would prepare a very sort of a meal every day. She's a chef, a very, very fine dining meal with simple ingredients, but it was offered to people, and it was a small restaurant come project like that. Next, please. Next, a music group which traveled to different cities. Earlier, please. A music group which traveled to different cities in their bus, and while they were playing music, they were also paying homage to the fishermen who had made a very important contribution to flood relief in Kerala just a few months before the Biennale opened. So this bus traveled to various cities and made performances in a homage to the fishermen who played a very major role. Next, please. A group from Sabah in Malaysia, and they're a young group. They're a punk rock group. They make wonderful, woodcuts, and they also solve problems of their community. They have and they're very, very really lovely young people who work together. Next, please. A section which is called the Sister Library, set up by Akitami, where all kind of books written by women. So the whole library was called the Sister Library, and I was dealing with all books published by women. Next, please. A quick run, futurism. Futurity is an important thing that I tried to kind of explore. Next, quickly, can we just go through the slides? An otolith project, thinking about Rabindranath Tagore as also bringing in the past and the future. Next, please. A project by, next. A loom that could be transformed into a musical instrument. Next. Next. Next, Kibuk. Next, Afra. Next. Just quickly, just some images. Go back, please. Just some images of the space that I created as an architectural space for dialogue. So it's the Gorilla Girls in a lecture performance. Next, please. Thomas Hirschhorn workshop. Next. Different kind of pop-up presentations that were happening continuously in this space. Next, please. A hip hop group which was performing in the space, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Anita, thank you so much. And with that,
sorry,
we will move on. Reem, and I think also there's not.
Sorry, I took too much time, but
yeah. So we have Reem, who's a curator and art historian and has organized many international biennales, exhibitions pertaining to art and geopolitics in the Middle East. She was the director of the Cultural Foundation, Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Tourism. Previously, she was the associate curator of Middle Eastern Art, Abu Dhabi project at the Guggenheim Museum 2010-16. And the director of the Palestine Association of Contemporary Art, PACA, Ramallah, from 2005 to 2007. She served as an academic director for the International Academy of Art Palestine, Ramallah, which she helped founded in 2006. With that, Reem, on to you, because we don't have much time.
Sure.
And yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I feel at home with the March meeting. I've been on several panels, but with you all, my esteemed fellow women, I feel very much at home. And I do want to say that, you know, I've had the privilege to see many of the biennials, Anita's and Yuko's, and I carry also a legacy of doing some of my work in inspiration of a lot of what I've seen from Kochi to Sharjah and onwards. So this is, I do want to speak particularly about my experience in curating the Marrakesh Biennial, the 6th edition, that happened in 2016. And I'll be very brief. So Arshiya, I'll give you more time later on for Q&A. And I have presented some of this previously with the Sharjah Art Foundation in previous March meeting. But this is a way for us to kind of recount and I want to say reminisce, but also, you know, think again about what we have done and how we would like to move forward. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Sorry, just give me a second. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, give me a second, please. Here we go. Let's share. I hope you can see my screen now. So really the premise of, I was invited in early 2015 to curate the Marrakesh Biennial in its 6th edition. It's been a turbulent, let's say, biennial because it's very much something that is non-governmental. It's a nonprofit organization, as mentioned by Arshiya, and it has been the effort of so many good people in Morocco, in Marrakesh in particular, with the lead of Vanessa Branson and many others as well. Amin Qabbaj and a group of multiple artists and people who've had the legacy to contribute to it. And they looked at, you know, expanding on what has been achieved so far with the biennial. And when I was invited, I had my own kind of anticipations, and I think it's very nice that you came ahead of me, Anita, and you talked about, I would say, a lot of things that complement the way I was thinking for the biennial in Marrakesh in terms of your concepts from fragility to empathy, etc. And I think these are a lot of the tropes that I identify with from within the global South as a larger kind of spectrum that is always marginalized. So the premise of the biennial really started with the title, and it holds, which as you see here is not new now. And I think for one thing, in a retrospect kind of way, it still resonates today. I find that kind of temporality and questioning of history really is evocative, and it's still quite important to our moment now, even within the pandemic. The whole idea was really to think about what are our sociopolitical urgencies and how can we, I would say I was in fact trying to critique this approach of modernism that always instigates a desire to anticipate, to look out for a future without ever being in the present moment, without being in the now. And I think for me, that critique of a futurism, of an aspect of, let's say, not catching up with time, was really an emphasis that I wanted to look into within this biennial. I really tried to think in a way that was also natural to the environment of the place. Kochi Biennial for me was one of, and of course Sharjah, a lot of the inspiration, which is, it works with the locale. We're producing things with artists in a long-term kind of way, with the society there. You're thinking about reciprocity with people. And for me, these elements became really important. And Marrakesh has long been, in many ways, it's enclosed. Morocco, its border kind of policies are quite stringent. Loaning would be very difficult. So there's a lot of these aspects. And of course, again, in terms of, let's say, financial support is very minimal. So what are the means to create an alternative site for such an exhibition, or a place for artists to be with the people there and produce there within that community? So I really worked within that ethos and the way of working that the Marrakesh Biennial had constantly operated. And at the same time, my general concerns became about largely anchored on issues of decolonization and understanding that I'm in the middle of Africa, in the middle of the Arab world, in the middle of the Amazigh world, in a place of a lot of diversity, and an emphasis to a lot of, I want to say, color, but at the same time marginalization. And that for me became also a pivot to inscribe and invite people to be there with me, and think about ways how we can really transform this landscape with that kind of, with these aspects. An assertive kind of self-assertion was really important as a gesture for the biennial. And another last kind of concept that I anchored myself in was thinking about, in our contemporaneity, in our now, what is the emphasis? And for me, quietness and stillness were also very important. Elements of the living were important. I was very aware of this dichotomous relationship between the West and this kind of, again, fast-paced, unattainable life, having been living in New York, but would go to Morocco for this project. And I would sense a different kind of moment of time. So this is something that for me became a really important element. How can I catch time? And how can I be there? The being in the moment became something really essential. And at the same time, this idea of the living became also an assertion that I wanted to emphasize. And I was utilizing the word living art instead of thinking about contemporary art, because living really for me was that aspect, that kind of cyclical aspect, the dialectical aspect that represents this voice of how the artists were operating, and how we were in fact kind of folded within the society. And here are just some of the examples we used. We had the biennial really took its format of its exhibition. There are no white walls, no kind of exhibition expo spaces, if you want, or museums with white walls in Morocco in that kind of traditional Western sense. But what you had were these glamorous historical sites that I had the privilege to have access to alongside my team. And I have to say this was a big collective effort. I mean, it wasn't just me. I had an amazing curatorial team with people like Ilaria Conti, Omar Barrada was also involved, and Fatma Zahra Lekhresa, Salma Lahlu, and many others. So it was a big kind of effort from multiple parts and multiple authors and voices. And of course, the integration of the artist within these spaces. And the biennial really unfolded in several chapters. This is the first chapter, which was called Living Matters. And this is, if you want, the first kind of moment that you encounter a sculpture made by Erik van Hove, that he has an atelier where he works with artisans and various artists within his workshop, and they reproduce. This is D9T, which is it's a motor of a tractor, and this was in a tribute to Rachel, who is one of the activists that unfortunately was killed in Palestine, defending one of the houses in Palestine that was trying to be demolished, and an Israeli tractor ran her over. And he created with the artisans a replica of that motor in various kind of craft forms. And he also invited artisans from Malaysia at that point, and they also produced various aspects of these artifacts. We dedicated a section on the Casablanca Art School, which is something that I've been really kind of obsessed with. And this was a moment where the Casablanca Art School and the ethos of the Casablanca Art School, and this is a very rich legacy in Morocco from the early 60s, starting from really the late 50s, but formulating in the 60s with a fantastic group of leader artists from Mohammed Melehi, Farid Belkahi, of course, Mohammed Shab'a, and Tony Mariani, and many others, thinkers and philosophers. And they really started to think about ways of how do they formulate their painting, their art, and at the same time, how do they present it to the public? One of their important manifestos was in Marrakesh, where they created an exhibition in the open air. And they showed their paintings in Jam' al-Ifna, which is one of the most public spaces in Morocco, that in Marrakesh particularly. And I took that inspiration and rehung these paintings, if you want, these tribute rooms in Al-Bahia for these artists, for the three pillar artists, Melehi, Shab'a, and Belkahi. I mean, I think this is something that this relationship for me with that group continues. I'm proud to say that in the end of this month, we are in the Cultural Foundation in Abu Dhabi, we are presenting a fantastic retrospective exhibition of Mohammed Shab'a, who passed away in the early 2000s. And it will also kind of look into that career and prolific career of that artist through the lens of that investigation, integration of craft, tradition, and creating this kind of contemporaneous but very highly politicized narrative and history. I also really wanted to emphasize the connectivity with a lot of artists, the African diaspora, the African-American artists that were also people that I've known and found out some of them had visited in Morocco in various kind of moments in time. These are some of these fantastic kind of tapestries by Al Loving and his collages. Sam Gilliam's hung paintings. I mean, it was, and it was quite remarkable because they became quite alive in these very specific, highly stylized rooms, right? Like it only added to the color of these and these fantastic installations, which I think was quite a celebration of them. Oscar Murillo, who really created this fabulous installation and an emphasis on really touching art and not thinking of art as separate from man, or something that is far more I want to precious in terms of its maintenance, or so he invited people to be able to touch or look within the paintings that are demonstrated within this space. One of the really quite important interventions was Omar Barrada's curated section, Memory Games, Ahmed Bounani Now, and he really looked at the legacy of Ahmed Bounani, a thinker, filmmaker, and theorist who looked at all these kind of craft traditions within Morocco. And he brought in the library of Bounani and set it up in an entire space that became an interactive living space for the audiences. Tariq Atwi's performances outdoors. This is the installation from a different site, which is the Palais Badia. And you can tell there are a swath of kind of artworks from Ella Natsui's mural to Rashid Quraishi's vases in the water, floating in the water. We had interventions of performances by Ridwan Mriziga and many, many other artists, Sabah Annab, Jumana Manna. And the title of this chapter was Living Ruins. So again, this thinking about what is kept and how do we preferentially veer for the living and not the matter, not the material. This is Kindred Viewpoints, which was, it was a commission by Ella Natsoui specific for Marrakesh and that site. More close-ups of Rashid Quraishi's, some of the installations of the performances. It was really chilly that day. Radhika Kimji's parachute piece that had landed on one of the walls. Fatiha Zamouri's fa stone sheltered from nothing that was installed, wedged into the walls of Al-Badiya. Ahmed Mater's beautiful, these windows that he had assembled and collected from Mecca, and we presented down below in the, and they were completely, you know, these windows were in the renovation projects were completely dismissed and thrown out, and he just collected them, and they had a legacy of quite a long history. But I think this debate and criticality about what is conserved and what isn't becomes a huge question. Dana Awartani, who worked alongside Eric Van Hove in the atelier and created these fantastic sculptural pieces with the artisans. And we also had a different site, which was Right and Right. The chapter was called Right and Right, inspired by Khalil Rabah's piece with the same name. And it really thought about concepts. Again, this is, you know, it was very important to think about how we think about multiple entities. How do we reformulate a lot of things from within our own societies, gender, domesticity, how do we think about kind of value propositions, Muna Hatoum being placed within this kind of, this particular room. These are some of this and that by Khalil Rabah, and we did a space where we really looked historically at some of his works from the early 90s onwards, and it was, you know, quite interesting to see that kind of legacy of his work, body and soul. So again, this issue of appropriation of body and thinking about the medium of that within that kind of intimate landscape of that space. Sandy Hilal and Alessandro Petti, in the wake of 2016, the issues of migration and the issues of migration, of course, was a huge, an important topic for many of the artists, and a lot wanted to tackle it. So they created the Book of Exile. They had been working with a lot of, with thinking about kind of a manual from the voice of refugees. And they asked the calligrapher to write it in Arabic in Morocco as a gesture for this book to kind of be present within the space of Morocco. And it became a gift to the city, the Book of Exile, for all of the immigrants that unfortunately passed also through Morocco, landing into Europe, etc. Superflex also presented, again, this issue of migration. Kawasa, one of these commissioned, we were one of the co-commissioners of this film that was quite epic, and we presented it in the Cisterns of Katoubia, one of the other sites in Marrakesh underneath. And yes, I mean, there were multiple other projects, but I think, you know, and a lot of other artists from Otolith Group to Mantya Diawara and many other people that were involved within this biennial. It included around 50 artists. And as I mentioned, a real kind of Afro-Asian centricity in an act of self-assertion and reclaiming our voice. And the city and its people, it was heavily attended, again, above, you know, even for Morocco and it's kind of these tourist sites that saw above 150,000 people within this framework of barely 6 weeks of the biennial, because it was also very costly to upkeep. Yeah, I'm going to be happy to answer any other questions we have later on. Thank you.
Reem looks wonderful, you know, like amazing. So can't wait to, you know, speak to you some more about it. But just very curious, I wanted to know, why did, you know, why was yours the last, you know, will it continue, or is it like, you know, because after 2016, there hasn't been any other. So
I will admit there was a lot of structural problems. Within that, like I do have to admit that I advanced a scale for the city in this biennial that I don't think the setup of the institution was able to handle, and to be able to kind of persist further on. Financially was part of one of the biggest kind of problems, which led to a certain kind of collapse of its structure. And moving onwards, you know, we've been trying, and I'm still involved, and I try with the makeup of the kind of board of the biennial to really try to push it forward, because I think, you know, this is an important place for us, for the Arab world, for the Middle East, even for Europe, right? This kind of, it's a real middle point in many ways. And Morocco has a lot to give, in terms of being an open place, and Marrakesh is just absolutely spectacular. So I think it's you know, it would be, I would say I would kind of use this opportunity to have a call with, you know, to put out a call for everyone to say, how can we try to create a resurgence of this important biennial for the entire region. I think it has a lot of potential.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Reem and Alia, on to you. Alia is the director of the Sharjah Biennial Foundation in Yogyakarta, and she's worked in numerous international exhibitions as a curator, project writer, and is the founder of SOAP. And with that, Alia, I hand it over to you because we're running short of time. So please, if you can, you know, join me in making your presentation.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity to invite me to be part of this panel. And as other people here, I'm very happy to see all the familiar faces here and to look back into experiences with Sharjah as well. Because I remember the first time I came to Sharjah, I visited the Yuko's edition. At the time, I have so many friends. My artist friend exhibited there, including one Indonesian artist in India. That also I will be presenting her works here. And of course, a few months ago, last year actually, I met Anita, and we had Anita's work during the first edition of the Biennial Jogja Equator. Anita didn't came to Jogja at that time, but with the help of the students, I can install her beautiful works in our National Museum. Okay, I'll try to, sorry. maybe you can help me to share the screen. Sorry. Sana, is it possible for you to share my screen? Okay. Yeah. Okay, next. Yeah, I think first I would like to introduce the idea of biennial Jogja Equator and why we set up the idea of particular geopolitical concept during the biennales. I think as mentioned by other people here, I think, for example, from the case of Kochi Biennale and also Marrakesh and also in Thailand, we learned on the idea how the biennial these days became part of the city's branding, spectacle, and other kind of entertainment. So in the scale of the biennales happen in the smaller places or the place where we don't really have the art infrastructure, I think it is important for us to rethink the form and the concept of the biennial itself, and the second also to think about the idea of internationalism itself. When we started to formulate the idea of Biennale Jogja, at that time, the idea of being part of the global art world just emerged. I think somehow in Asia, it's kind of the effect of the expanding the influence of Chinese art world in Asia itself. So we start to think how we can be part of the global art world, even we have very small limitation in, I think, in terms of the funding, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the government support and many other limitations. But how can we put ourselves also in the map of the global art world today? And beyond that, we would like to have the bigger contribution on the idea, on the ideological and positional political positions in terms of art world today. So the equator concept is chosen because it represents the similar and long history of colonialism happens on the continent. And we try to look back into what happened in the region during 1950s. So we were very much inspired by the Asia-Africa Conference at that time, where we see how the Global South, even though at that time it was not called as Global South, but all the countries where they just gained the independence or they are still struggling with colonialism, gathered and showing the solidarity between those countries. And the Asia-Africa Conference happened and partly initiated by our first president, Sukarno. So at that time, when we started to reconceptualize the Biennale, we wanted to somehow took the inspiration from the Asia Africa Conference, from the Bandung spirit, to be part of this kind of solidarity in the art world. And if we think about the new democracy, the new nationalism, and how the economic has been played during the situation after the Cold War and post-Cold War situations. Next. So for us, it is important also if we talk about the relationship between the Sharjah Biennial and the Sharjah Biennial, we think about the exchange, because as I mentioned, we have so difficult situation in Indonesia. For example, even with the custom, it is almost impossible for us to do international exhibition where we can bring the works from other countries come to Indonesia. So what one of the experience, for example, when I did the Biennale in 2011, all the works came from India just like 10 hours before the opening, 10 hours before the preview. So it's kind of very difficult for us, the organizer, to arrange, to display all the artworks. And, you know, like in the end, like everything happened in the very last minute. So since then, we try to avoid all this, more importing the works from abroad, because it's kind of impossible to do that in Indonesia with the situation with custom and bureaucracy and other things. So most of our approach is using residency and exchange as the platform of artistic production. So it's very important to look into the specificity and new commission as part of our Biennale with the smaller scale that we have. So during the second round of the Biennale, we worked with Arab countries. At that time, we worked with Egypt, we worked with Emirates and Saudi. The Biennale itself curated by Agung Hujat Nika and Sarah Rifki. It's kind of the first experiments that we did also to send over. So usually the Biennale, we only invite artists from abroad or the country partner to come and to produce work in Indonesia. But since the second edition, we also try to send over some artists to have residency and research to learn more about the area we are working with. So we have the opportunity to send 2 Indonesian artists to Sharjah at that time. First one is Tintin Mulia, Australian-based Indonesian artist. We can go to the next one. So this is the situation where she did residency in Sharjah. Then next. This is her installation where we had the exhibition in Jogja during the Biennale. So she created the sound installation. It's hanging all over around the trees and the plants. So in a way, it's kind of like replacing the natural sounds like the birds and the winds and everything. So she created this installation from the poets created by poets from Sharjah about boundaries, cartography, and migration that become the topics that Tintin has been interested for such a long time. Next. So at the time, in 2013, actually, Tintin also was invited by Yuko Hasegawa to present this project, Terra and Konita. So this project is kind of like combination of performance and interactive project where audience are invited to choose their own, or it's from lottery, so they can choose the place, they can buy the place or islands or the lands in this map of the world. And a few days ago, I talked and discussed with Tintin about her experience in Sharjah, and she mentioned that for her, it is very interesting that in Sharjah, she could see the difference of alphabets that are being used to in writing the territory that she asked the audience to do so. So in many other places where she presented the works, like in Singapore or in Australia, in Hong Kong, most of the time we have only Latin alphabet. But in Sharjah, suddenly she has Arabic, she has Tamil, and she has many other alphabets from other countries. So it is interesting that in Sharjah, most of the artists also learns on the idea of diversity, not only about the cultures, but also the long history that connect between the Asia and Arab worlds. Next. So the second artist that we present, we bring to Sharjah is Prila Thania. Same as Tintin, she spent like 2 months doing residency in Sharjah, and she's very much interested to the idea of the city itself. So she created this video and paper cutting installation where she tried to capture the movement of people in the city of Sharjah. Next. So this is, we can see how she created those walls and border. Many of the artists that come to Sharjah, I think also being mentioned by Yuko Hasegawa before, that very much inspired with the architecture and the landscape of the city itself, where the courtyard, the wall, and the contradiction between inside and outside become very visible. So in this installation also, Prila tried to put the stories of the common people who live in Sharjah, from the migrant workers to the employees of the foundation, for example, where they walk around and put the story into this cartography or the map of Sharjah that coming from their stories and inspirations. Next. So the next project that we did for the collaboration is the Time is Out of Joy, curated by Tariq Abu El Fato. And he brought different discourses on decoloniality as part of contemporary art praxis. And at that time, we were bringing our Deputy Minister of Culture, Mr. Hilmar Farid, and sharing how the cultural legacy and the forming of identity become a part of the cultural strategic now developed by Indonesian government. At the time also, we invited artists, like some Indonesian artists like Vensa and Tita Salina, who works mostly with the idea of environment. And Tita specifically created performance where she made the island that made of trash, and we have the islands floating on the water part, in the waterfront of Sharjah Foundation. Next. So if we talk about the connection between Sharjah and Southeast Asia and beyond, I think for me, particularly, I'm interested also to think about the learning process of different practices, where we can see how the Islamic culture melt and blend into different forms of practices. That in Indonesia, sometimes when we talk about the art from Islamic world, usually we only talk about calligraphy or geometric ornaments or something that is very traditional. I think in a way, as the countries that we don't really have big infrastructure for the arts and culture, usually most of the idea of internationalism being shaped by these countries that they have established cultural offices like the Buddha Institute, British Council, Japan Foundation. So most of the idea of international art very limited to our relationship with this institution. So I think in a way the important roles played by institutions like Sharjah Biennial Foundation or also Jakarta Biennale in Jakarta is bringing up, expanding this imagination of culture, imagination of internationalism, not only limited to Europe and America or the US, but also look into the history where we connect with more countries in the global south. And that's why I think it is important also for us to keep and maintain our collaboration with institutions like Kochi Biennale or also other places in the Sharjah, of course, and also other places like in Africa, where we closely working with the Center for Contemporary Art with BC Silva at that time, and then pass to the next generation of the people who runs that organization. So I think in a way, Sharjah Biennale has been very inspiring for us to connect as well, or to rethink the idea how international Biennale also can be connected to the local situation. Because I think this is the question that always came up when we organized the Biennale, how we trying to bring international artists, to bring international discourse, but at the same time to reconnect with the local situation. Many people in Yogyakarta think that it is more important to look into or to nurture the local ecosystem instead of bringing up all these foreign artists, for example. But in the time of global world, I think the local and international is always exchangeable. Everywhere local, I think, is also international. We cannot really separate those conceptions into two different things. It's always being exchangeable all the time. So I think this kind of meetings, platform meetings, where we invited artists from India, Arab, Brazil, Nigeria, and last year was Southeast Asia, become very important experience, not only for the artists, but also the community they are working with. And as I mentioned before, we have opened up so many inclusive perspective where we try to destroy the stereotypical image of one cultural context or stereotypical identity and put them into the fields of the practice of everyday life. Next, or I think it's my last presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hi. So thank you so much for that, Alia. And unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but this has been such a tremendous session, and which has been so rich, very exciting, and like such an incredible opportunity. And I hope that we will have a chance to continue it later. But unfortunately, the Sharjah Biennale have another talk, so it's not possible to do questions. But maybe if in any case, if you can write in some of your thoughts, we'd be happy to share it with the presenters, because you know what, it's very valuable to us. But I'd like to thank each and every one of you. It was just delightful and very, very rich to kind of speak about different locations, spaces, and the different also challenges of doing these biennales, which can't be easy, including the finances and the shipments that you were talking about, Alia, and also for Reem, biennale that has overextended, and how can one realize it? So lots of very good thoughts and questions. Having said that, just very quickly, since we have like 3 minutes, could I invite the participants to add something if they'd like to just say something very quickly? No one?
Because I just want to say one thing, and I really pleasure to listen to all these and kind of speakers. Also, Anita, I like the word is and pleasure, very, very important. Also, Arias and it's the connectivity. Also, also inter-reliance is very important. Also, Reem, and congratulations, you're gonna have a baby. So I'm so glad to hear about that. Also, you have very good and beautiful kind of products. Also, you are kind of the great person to facilitate all the different elements with a collaboration with the artist. So also, the language of the, object is great. So that is, I just want to say, because now I'm just thinking about, what the trust is. Because AI highly developed. Because instead of the, making, this kind of trust between the people, and this is something like, internet also, and global economies and just proceed for us because, they just try to make a different kind of system to trust. So in a way, how the art just to follow and those kind of AI operation, also how the art to be opposed to that, but also how art can utilize that. Because for me, it's very interesting to just say it's interaction, not interaction. Interaction means go into inside. You just get the feeling you're going to be in the inside. You get the feeling yourself also outside together. So now we are living in time, so we cannot get out those kind of situations. But it's very good, and we know, I know all of you, and just every day try to make something happen. So that is great. So that's my comment.
Well, thank you so much, and wish you all the very best for your Biennale. And
please come to Thai.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
just
all
wonder
the
how you're
best.
going to actually challenge, the COVID
Until November.
period. Yeah, so all the very best to you, Yuko, and do keep in touch. And hopefully we would stay in touch. And thanks again, and thanks Sharjah Biennale for the invitation. It was just wonderful to have this session.
Yeah, let's organize something kind of nice talk session, even if in Sharjah. I just try to do that, to just invite the ladies. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.